Good evening, everyone. We are back in our study of the book of Joshua, and we are in chapter 10. Now, obviously, many people are quite anxious to actually take a closer look at this chapter because of the incident that has happened and never happened again. But as we come to chapter 10, I want to point out a couple of things before we begin. It's a long chapter, and we will probably break it into two. But important for us to realize the geography as well as what happened to the Gibeonites, the Gibeon, right? They made a peace treaty with the children of Israel, and then in turn, they were willing to be their servants, and they became woodcutters. They collect wood as well as drawing water for the children of Israel. And so, as a start, the Gibeons, the inhabitants of Gibeon, eventually had a long record in the history books of the Israelites. The interesting thing is, while we were thinking that, yes, Joshua seems to have cursed them, and that's where we left off yesterday, but the idea of curse is nothing like our modern day thinking. In fact, the Gibeonites were very willing to submit and serve the house of God. And in so doing, the Gibeonites were retained, meaning their names were retained, their lives were preserved, whereas all the other kings, which we will see today in chapter 10, they would all lose out. And so the Gibeonites, in fact, if you look at First Chronicles, chapter 21, right? And in verse 29, you could actually see that at the time of David, and David was in Jerusalem. He took over the Jebusite stronghold, but there was no temple. There was only an altar, but more importantly, the tabernacle itself was in Gibeon, and David dare not go there to offer a sacrifice and draw to God there at Gibeon. And so the history of Gibeon, as we read yesterday, that we thought that, oh, they've been cursed, in fact has been a blessing for them, in the sense that, yes, they never had their normal lifestyle again. They are now subservient to the Israelites, but they submitted to the good and upright will of the people of Israel. And in so doing, as the children of Israel honored God, the Gibeonites understands that they will never go against the oath they made in the name of Jehovah. And so we can see that the Gibeons actually had a long history preserved. Now, I want to briefly take you into the geography of this matter. It's important for us to have a clear concept as to the placement of some of these cities, which we are still guessing for the most part, right? We have Shittim, even though there is no question mark, I would say that many of these locations are not the locations you can see today. Many of them are in ruins or found under the current cities. But interestingly, you find from Shittim, they make their home in Gilgal when they cross the river. 12 stones picked up from the river to stack up as a monument. They attack Jericho. They attack Ai. And then they made peace with Gibeon. And that is important for us to understand. And today we will see a number of locations. We will see, I think here would be Jerusalem. And then you have Lachish here, Eglon, Hebron, Devere. Then we have the cave of Makkedah. We'll talk about it later today. And then you see incredible event that happens in between Ayalon and Gibeon, where supposedly the sun stood still event, right? And so what has happened is this entire area is a war zone. And so these are some of the locations that we need to understand, and these are the kings of this part of the land, of the south. Now, again, I would say that though we have a map, not all locations are exactly where they are today. We don't really know for a large part, but they are somewhere there, somewhere there. Now, having that in mind, I think we need to then look at chapter 10. It came to pass when, and we have this name, Adon Zedek. Adon Zedek is the king of Jerusalem. Now, at this point in time, there is no Jerusalem, by the way. Jerusalem only happened as a placement point in this context because David hasn't taken over the Jebusite stronghold to rename it to Jerusalem. But this was the place where you have a king by name of Adoni Zedek, which is my Lord is righteous. But obviously, one of the things you would see is just having a name as my Lord is righteous doesn't make him righteous, right? It is really who you serve as God that will make you righteous. But in this case, he was a king from this place called Jerusalem. And they heard, now remember in Hebrew, everything is very vivid, to see, to hear, right? And this leads to knowledge. And they heard how Joshua had taken Ai and utterly destroyed it. Remember, they burned down everything and took only the cattle and some spoils. And the king of Ai was hanged, right? As he had done to Jericho and its king. And what did they do to Jericho and the king? They did to Ai and its king. They burned everything in Jericho and hanged the king. And how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace. Made peace means a peace treaty, a shalom with Israel, and were among them, which means that Israel and Gibeon will stay in peace and live amongst each other. And so they is who? They would be the king of Jerusalem, right? And these were the people who were living there, and they feared greatly because Gibeon was a great city. Now, great city would mean that it is fortified, it is strong, it is impenetrable, it is, and then you've got heroes and valiant men. So you see, one of the royal cities, and they recognize it as a royal city because it has a king. And it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. And that's the character of Gibeon. And yet, Gibeon decides to make peace with Israel and serve Israel instead. Then there must be something that Gibeon knows of Israel that the rest of the kings appear not to. And so now the king Adoni-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, sent to Hoham. This would be Hoham, the king of Hebron. And then we have Piram, the king of Yarmouth. And then this next one is Yaphia, the king of Lachish. Then we have Debir, the king of Eglon. And all of them, see, you have how many here? You have one king, two kings, three kings, four kings, five kings. And we will read about what happened to all five of them. He says, come up to me and help me that we may attack Gibeon. for it has made peace with Joshua and with the children of Israel. Why Gibeon? Understand, in the previous chapter, all the people there, including the Hivites, right? And we learned about the Hivites being tricked by the children of Jacob. And now in turn, the children of Hivite tricked Joshua and the children of Israel. But it's all for the sake of maintaining peace and that they do not want to be completely destroyed. So they know about Joshua and the children of Israel, and they know even more the God of the children of Israel. And so therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, king of Hebron, king of Yarmouth, king of Lachish, king of Eglon, they gathered or assembled together, right? Assembled together and went up. Now notice the location is that Gibeon is on a higher terrain, so is Jerusalem. And so when they gather to go up, the southern part of Canaan is actually lower than the northern part. And they, with all their armies, they camped before Gibeon and made war against it. And verse 5, it says, made war is in preparation to fight, right? To engage in battle. And they were there. When it says before Gibeon, the word is really not before Gibeon. The word is upon Gibeon. All right? Upon Gibeon or towards Gibeon. Right? Towards Gibeon, in an area looking to Gibeon. And they want to engage in battle. Now in verse 6, the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal. So we recall yesterday, the headquarters of Joshua was at Gilgal. And these men of Gibeon says, do not forsake your servants. Understand this word. Do not forsake means do not abandon your servants, because they are now their servants. They collect wood and they collect water for them. So do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly. And the word to save quickly means with haste, right? With haste. And I guess life is at stake. And the word save us and the second word here, to help us, is broken down in this way. Save us means to deliver us. Help us means to support us. And in so doing, you find that all of these words essentially talks about defending, right? Defending the Gibeonites. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us. The idea here, he says, against us, seems to say that they were the ones dwelling up in the mountain. They have actually collected towards us, right? This would be toward us, right? Towards us. And so you find here Joshua ascended from Gilgal, all the people of war with him, and you recognize all the people of war is 20 years and above, right? All the men. They don't enlist the women, and all the mighty men of valor And the Lord said to Joshua, notice this is actually with God, with them. He says, do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. So these are very important words. Do not be afraid, for I have delivered them into your hand. And the word deliver them into your hand means that I have given. And historically speaking, you find that Joshua with Moses, when God says, I will deliver the King Sihon and King Og into your hands, it literally means that God has approved and God will enable, and you just go and do your job and you will overpower them. And so in the battle with Jericho, Joshua did that. In the battle of Ai, exactly the same words were said. And so there seems to be a pattern now that Joshua would be very familiar. When God is with them, no one can withstand them. And so not a man of them shall stand before you. And so Joshua came upon them suddenly. Verse 9, suddenly, literally means in a surprise move. Now, why is it surprise? Well, two things you would see. One is the five kings did not expect Joshua and the children of Israel to come to the assistance of the Gibeonites. And number two, they never expected them to come so quickly. And so we read they had marched all night from Gilgal. And so the Lord routed them before Israel. What do you mean by routed them? The word here is confused. The word routed is confused. And the idea of confused literally means to put them in a state of confusion. They were troubled by Israel. And then you find that God killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them along the road that goes to Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And how did God confuse them? Well, you see that Israel executed the warfare. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were on the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven. Now, these large hailstones, you need to understand that these are stones that is coming down from the sky. And they are large. And hailstones doesn't mean ice, right? It probably means stones of fire that came down from heaven, and they are large ones. And the word here, the word used is gadola, and it means big, really big. From the skies on them, as far as Azekah, and they died. And so God struck them with these supernatural stones of fire. And I believe that it's probably some earthquake or volcanic activity, but they were called on by God, and it rained on them, and more who died from the hailstone than the children of Israel killed with the sword. And this literally shows them how God personally dealt with them. And while the children of Israel were chasing them with the sword, God did most of the work. And that's where you find this word routed, to confuse them, and killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon. So both the children of Israel and God did the work here. Now we come to verse 12. As we can see this place, that we could see two things: God raining down with hailstones, or what we call stones of fire, big ones, and God also struck them dead with the children of Israel. And then we had Joshua spoke to the Lord in that day, right? In the day. In the day, I think here would be in the day when it was still bright. Right? In the day, in the bright part of the day, when the Lord gave up the Amorites before the children of Israel. Remember the word delivered is to give. And so God gave and allowed the children of Israel to destroy them. And as this confusion was holding on, remember there are two aspects. One, hailstones. And two, the sword. And so two things were happening, one by God and one by the children of Israel. And Joshua said this in the sight of Israel. And this would be the eye of Israel, the eyes of Israel. And we have these words: sun stands still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ayalon. Let's look at this passage. It says, this is a very interesting passage because the English itself is unable to expand this adequately. So one of the things you would see is that this is actually a song. So it is poetic. And you notice this is not sun stand still, basically, all right? The word here, stand still, comes from a word, be silent or be dumb. And basically that's what it means. And one of the things that you find in the Hebrew Bible is that these elements that we call elements, the sun and the moon, are party to be able to respond to God. Just like the skies and the land are called to witness, the sun and the moon appears to be living objects. That's in the poetic way, right? And it says, sun, keep quiet over Gibeon. The moon over the valley of Ahion, right? Ayalon, sorry. Ayalon. And so this is something which I think we need to expand a bit. Because it is the sun, you find that the word here is more of be silent, speak no more. Right? And the moon in the valley of Ayalon. And this would be the low country, the lowland of Ayalon. Remember, we have Gibeon and Ayalon, right? Gibeon. And so they were going down, and then we have this event that Joshua said. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Yasher? So the sun stood still in the middle of the heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that before or after that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So let me just spend some time to break this down and help us all understand it a little better. First of all, this is a song. And it says, sun, be silent. Moon, be silent. So this is not about stopping, right, in midair. Now, understand that much of what is described in the Hebrew language is very imagery driven. No things that you can see and you can hear what Joshua is saying. And so the word is not stand still. The word is be silent. And so verse 13 says, and the sun was silent. And then the moon, and the word is not stop, by the way. The moon is, how should you say? The moon, I would say that it took position, right? Took position to, well, I guess you could say to delay, right? To delay, to persist, right? That would be a better word to use. Until the people, well, the people here, the people here appears not to be the Israelites. The people here is the Ger. And the Ger had avenged. This means to take vengeance. Upon their enemies. The word enemy would be those who are hostile. Now that is the background, right? And so the idea here is, did the sun stand still? Is the question. Or is this a particular event that the sun and the moon, yes, had some supernatural effect, but it wasn't standing still in that sense, because the sun still has to set and the moon still has to come out. So was there a setting that was delayed, right? Now, let me just unpack the rest of verse 13 and 14 first. Is this not written in the book of Yashar? Yashar. Yashar means upright, right? The ones who are straight. And so the Jews don't think that this is called the book of Jasher, as we read here. They think that this was a book about the upright people. That's how it is read, right? It is not a book called Jasher. It is a book about people who are upright and straight. And that would be one of the view. And so the sun stood. Now the word still is not there in the Hebrew. And so the word here means the sun took position. Right? Took position. And then it says in the midst, but it's actually not in the midst. The word here is in the half or in the middle. This is a very specific location. It's not the general word that he dwelt in the midst of them, right? This is literally in midway of the skies. And so the word heavens here is the skies, right? And did not hasten. And did not hasten. The word hasten literally means, did not hurry. And I guess you can say is not pressed, not urgent. to, the next word here is to, well, the word here is not to go down. The word here is actually to come down, right? To come. And it really doesn't mean for a whole day. How would I put it? I think it would be better translated like as the day comes to an end. And so let me just break this down for us to understand. It says the sun took position in the middle or the half of the skies, and it did not hurry to set like the normal day when it comes to an end. That is the phrasing here in the Hebrew. All right. All it means is that as the song is being vocalized by Joshua, the sun decides not to set hurriedly. Now, if you are familiar with the sunset, the effect of a sunset is this. As the sun comes down to the horizon, it is initially quite slow, and then it picks up speed, and the moment it gets near the horizon, it dips past the horizon very quickly. And that is what it means by hasten, that the time it took to set the sun is not the usual time it took, number one, or in appearance. Number two, the sun was always bright up in the sky. That is what it means, that the daylight portion of the day, right, spoke to the Lord in the day. The day means the bright portion of the day, that the sun took, or it felt that it took a lot longer to set than it normally would. That's the effect that is being painted. And that's the imagery, that the sun is not in a hurry to go down, which means that even though it seems to be going down, the sun is still brilliant. And so that is the picture, I would think, that is being painted here, that at this point in time, in this battle, to allow the Gibeons to fight as well. I believe that is what happens. And the Israelites are fighting on behalf of the Gibeon till all the Ger had taken vengeance upon their enemies. And here it's really the idea here is the foreigners, I would say, right, has taken vengeance. Perhaps in this particular aspect, some would think that this is the Israelites, but it appears that it's using a very unusual word that is normally used for non-Israelites. But it is in the singular, nevertheless. And so I would think that it would refer to the Gibeonites who are now there with the Israelites, and they would have to do their work. Right? And the idea of the sun stood still, I would say that the sun remained very bright. Very bright until the setting. I think this would be the miracle. Rather than the sun stood still, meaning the earth stops its rotation, and you hear all this spectacular scientific explanation or attempts, right? I find it a bit difficult to think of how the earth can stop its rotation just for Joshua and this event. But to enable the sun to remain very bright until the setting, would be a supernatural event, it would still do the same result, that they can still see all the way through the day. And then only the darkness comes very suddenly. And so the Lord listened to the voice of a man, and this would be Joshua, because this is about the fight. For the Lord fought for Israel. And the word fight here is the Lord is making battle. And so you find that the hailstones and the brightness of the sun, as if that the sun was still in its brightest position, and it is not urgent setting. And you know, the setting sun is that it gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. But I would think that in this case, the sun never grew dim until it disappeared off the horizon. Right? That would be my take to it. And understand the difficulty in translating this passage, because we're so used to the English that it is not quite how the English express it. So perhaps you may want to go back and revisit this passage again. Verse 15, Joshua then returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. This battle that was fought was over in that day. Right? In that day. Because it took the day and you need the light to fight. Right? That was basically what it meant. Now, I want to do a few more verses before we take a break. But these 5 kings had fled. The 5 kings had tried to escape. That's what the word means, right? And hid themselves in a cave at Makkedah, which I showed you, somewhere south of Ayalon. And it was told to Joshua, saying, the 5 kings had been found hidden in a cave at Makkedah. And so Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave. That will be to prevent them from leaving or escaping, and set men by it to guard them. Verse 18 really means, the word guard here is to keep. It's the same word as keep my commandments. Same word, shamar. Okay? Shamar is to guard, to keep, to watch them. Right? And then it says to roll. Well, large stones are not carried. And so these are big stones. I think you would call them, they are probably hewn stones cut out from the cliff. Against the mouth. The word against the mouth here is upon the mouth. Now, upon the mouth means that if you have a cave, the big stone would be on the exit. Right? That would be what it means by upon the cave, the mouth of the cave. And so this is the specifics, right? The mouth of the cave. And it says, do not stay there yourselves, but pursue your enemies and attack their rear guard. And so if you understand, even the Israelites have a front guard and a rear guard, and they were attacking their enemies. And so that was part of the song. So the unusual word of a ger, although usually used for non-Israelites, were used on them in representing the men of Gibeon, to fight against the Amorites. It says, do not allow them to enter their cities, for the Lord your God has delivered them into your hand. So you notice this word, delivered them or given them into your hands means you can destroy them. So the permission is given. And then it happened, right? In verse 20. And then it happened while Joshua and the children of Israel made an end of slaying. The word slaying here is to strike. Strike, to kill. So the word slaying is not an accurate word, but it works. It works. With a very great slaughter. And so this strike was a great blow, right? A great blow. So it is with comparison to the word strike, to kill, and the word blow is a pair. But it is about a slaughter. It is about a carnage. It is about a conquest, right? It is about a conquest until they had finished. And the word finish means complete, right? Complete. This word complete, I guess it is also very, very much what we have read here when they have struck down the last of them, and that those who escaped entered the fortified cities. And so they did manage to get into the fortified cities, and then all the people returned to the camp, to Joshua at Makkedah in peace. So they are now in between all these fortified cities and Makkedah. And that is the position they are now, and no one moved his tongue against any of the children of Israel. What do you mean that? The word here, moved his tongue. I guess the word here is pointed. Pointed their tongue. Or how should we say this? Haratz would be to point their tongue, to sharpen. To sharpen, right? To sharpen. And no one means none of the enemy is there. Point their tongue against any of the children of Israel. And the reason is because you could see that the power and might and the strength of God was behind the children of Israel. And with that gives the intense fear in these people who ran away and escaped and ran back to their fortified cities. They dare not say anything anymore. And in fact, the kings are now here in Makkedah. Right? That is what it means. Now, this other word here, they came back in peace, means that they have soundness of body. They had peace. They had completeness. Right? Completeness. What does that mean? It means that, number one, of course, they are not hurt. Number two, they have completed their mission, and they have chased them down and slaughtered them. And they are now completed in all their the carnage and the warfare. That is what shalom means. They have completed and everything is done. Right? Well and happy. And so with this, we come to the end of the first part of chapter 10.